Good afternoon to you. It's 3 p.m. East African time. This here from Nairobi, Kenya. Good morning, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in and joining me from. The show is Diaspora Dispatches, where we get to discuss some very important news and events across the continent of Africa and how they relate to the global issues in the contemporary world that we are dealing with today. My name is Samora Machel, and it is a pleasure to have you on board today. Marks the anniversary of the death of Mozambique's first black president, Samora Machel. And we know every time we look at Africa's history, we come across his name a lot of times, and when we're looking at the history of Mozambique and of course his contribution towards the liberation of a lot of other countries from across the continent. And today is about 53 years since he died on that fateful plane crash in 1986. 19th October in South Africa on his way from Zambia. Okay, and a lot has been said. There's still not conclusive report on what exactly caused his death. There's a lot of speculation on what might have happened and who might have been behind that plane crash, but still no conclusive report has been made since his death a couple of years ago. He died at the age of 53, but he died in 1986. Sorry. So today we mark about 36 years since his death, not 53. He died at the age of 53. He was born in 1933. He died in October 19th, 1986. And so today marks about 36 years since his death. So I have to correct that, not 53 years. It is 36 years since his death. And so Samora Machel was a Mozambican military commander and political leader. A socialist in the tradition of Marxism and Leninism, he served as the first president of Mozambique from the country's independence in 1975. And in case you're wondering, and I will not get into the details of the definitions of these theories, Marxism is the political and economic theories of Karl Marx, forms of basis of communism. So he took that and then on top of that built on Leninism, which is built on eminence from Marxism, and this means that a political ideology developed by Russian Marxist Vladimir Lenin, and that proposes the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, led by a revolutionary vanguard party as a political prelude to the establishment of communism. So Samora Machel believed in these ideologies, Marxism and Leninism. And so Machel was born in the village of Madroga, which currently today in Mozambique is known as Chilembene, the Gaza province in Mozambique, to a family of farmers. His grandfather had been an active collaborator of Gungun Hana under Portuguese rule. His father, like most black Mozambicans, were classified by the demeaning term Indigana since he was a collaborator with the Portuguese. So I think he did not fit very well within the society of the black Mozambique. Probably this word means a sellout. He was forced to accept lower prices for his crops than white farmers, compelled to grow labor-intensive cotton by force. So when the Portuguese took up the black people's land by force, you were forced to grow cotton because Portugal needed that, a lot of raw materials. And during that time, a lot of these colonialist countries, they needed raw material from Africa so that they can take them back home because they needed it back in Europe. So that is what happened in Portuguese. So his grandfather, one of the black farmers that were forced to abandon whatever it is that they were farming and planting in their farms, and they were forced to plant cotton because Portugal needed cotton at that time, and which took time away from the food crops needed for his family and forbidden to brand his mark on his cattle to prevent thievery. However, Machel's father was a successful farmer, so his grandfather, but his father now was a successful farmer, and owned a good number of head of cattle. By 1940, Machel grew up in this farming village and attended a mission elementary school in 1942. He went to a school in the town of Zongwene in Gaza province. The school was run by Catholic missionaries who educated the children in Portuguese language and culture. Although having completed the 4th grade, Machel never completed his secondary education. However, he had the prerequisite certificate to train as a nurse anywhere in Portugal at the time, since the nursing schools were not degree conferring institutions. So he is actually a trained nurse. All right, I know that is a very surprising fact there, because back then I think I don't know how many men were even taking up the nursing profession, but I think that is something that I would like to know what really interested him in this career. It's a noble career, but anyway, we'll just move on from that. So he's a trained nurse, and Machel started to study nursing in the capital of Lourenço Marques, today known as Maputo, beginning in 1954. And in the 50s, he saw some of the fertile lands around his farming community on the Limpopo River appropriated by the provincial government and worked by white settlers who developed a wide range of new infrastructure for the region. And like many Mozambicans are near the poor border of Mozambique, some of his relatives went to work in the South African mines, where additional job opportunities were found. Shortly afterwards, one of his brothers was killed in a mining incident. Unable to complete formal training at the Miguel Bombarda Hospital in Lourenço, in Marques, he got a job working as an aide in the same hospital, and earned enough to continue his education at night school. He worked at the hospital until he left the country to join the Mozambican nationalist struggle in neighboring Tanzania. So it is during this time that he was working as a nurse that really the discrepancies between how even the black nurses and the white nurses are being treated. The white nurses had better working conditions and they were paid more than the black nurses, and the black nurses were doing more in terms of work input, but they were paid less. So it is this kind of inequalities that really planted the seed of trying to liberate, and him joining the liberation movement of Mozambique. And Machel was attracted to anti-colonial ideals and began his political activities in the Miguel Bombarda Hospital in Lourenço Marques, where he protested against, like I've explained there, the fact that the black nurses were paid less than whites, doing same job or even more. And he decided to leave that hospital when a white anti-fascist and pharmaceutical representative, Yao Ferreira, warned him that he was being watched by the Portuguese political police. I think even at that time, he was very vocal, and I think he spoke out, and because of that, this attracted the attention of the Portuguese political police, and they were just trailing him so that he was not able to start agitation or problems for them, because during that time, during that period, a lot of African countries had started the agitation, and a good number of them had already received their independence, and so the Portuguese were worried that these outspoken black nurse might cause problems for them, so he was warned. And because of that, he slipped across the border and made his way to join Frelimo in Dar es Salaam via Swaziland. I think Swaziland, their current name is, I'm forgetting, what a shame. Yeah, they changed the name of that country now, Eswatini. Yeah, it is called Eswatini. All right, Swaziland. So in South Africa, so he slipped through, he wanted to go to Dar es Salaam where Frelimo was in formation. So he slipped through Swaziland, South Africa, and then Botswana. And in Botswana, he hitched a lift on a plane carrying recruits of the African National Congress, that is from South Africa, ANC from South Africa to Tanzania, and impressed by the young Mozambican, a senior ANC official, J.B. Max, bumped one of the ANC recruits off the flight to let Machel on. So because of the spirit of determination that these people saw in this young Mozambican, this young nurse from Mozambique, they said, you know what? It is worth trading his place with one of the ANC recruits that was on that flight. So they traded him for Machel to take his place. And so in Dar es Salaam, Machel volunteered for military service and was one of the second group of Frelimo guerrillas sent for training in Algeria. And back in Tanzania, he was put in charge of Frelimo's own training camp at Kongwa after Frelimo launched the independence war on September 25th, 1964. Machel soon became a key commander, making his name in particular in the grueling conditions of the eastern area of vast and sparsely populated province of Niassa. And he rapidly rose up the ranks of the guerrilla army, the FPLM, and became the head of the army after the death of its first commander, Felipe Samuel Magaya, in October 1966. Frelimo's founder and vice president, Eduardo Mondlane, I think we talk about him sometimes here. Mondlane was assassinated by a parcel bomb in February 3rd, 1969. His deputy, Reverend Uriah Simango, expected to take over, but instead, the Frelimo Executive Committee appointed a presidential triumvirate consisting of Simango, Machel, and veteran nationalist and poet Marcelino dos Santos. And Simango soon broke ranks and denounced the rest of the Frelimo leadership in the pamphlet, which became to be known as the gloomy situation in Frelimo, and this led to Simango's expulsion from the Liberation Front and the election in 1970 of Machel as Frelimo's president. So that is how he rose to the helm of that movement, the Frelimo movement at that time, who with Dos Santos as deputy president. All right, not the Dos Santos for the former Angolan president, but one of the members here, Marcelino dos Santos. They all have Portuguese names. They all were colonized by Portugal, Angola, Mozambique, and another country I'm forgetting there in Africa. Like the late Mondlane, Machel identified himself with Marxism and Leninism, like I have explained there earlier, and under his leadership, these positions became central to Frelimo, which evolved from a broad front into a more Marxist party. And let me just remind us what a Marxist party or ideology is built on. This is a political and economical theory of Karl Marx, and which forms the basis of communism. So you can see how that ties in there. And so that is how they built the ideology at that time, Frelimo. In 1972, Frelimo crossed the Zambezi River, striking farther and farther south. By 1973, Frelimo units were operating. Remember, at this time, they were being led by Samora Machel. Okay, were operating in Manica and Sofala province and began to hit the railway from Rhodesia to Beira, causing panic among the settler population of Beira, who accused the Portuguese army of not doing enough to defend the white interest. And remember, this white interest, these people had removed Africans from their indigenous lands, and they had taken over these lands by force, and they were growing whatever it is they wanted to grow, and the Africans who also still own some lands, a few of them, were also being forced to farm whatever it is the Portuguese were asking them to farm, to provide raw materials and whatever it is that Portugal needed at that time. So that is where they were getting. So when you hear us say here, when you hear anybody say that Europe actually was built on the back of African labor and raw material, that is true. Not just through Europe, even the US and other countries. That is actually true when you look back to the history and where that all started. And I think Mozambique is a very good example of where some of these countries got their raw material and the supply of everything else they needed to advance themselves to what they call today the first world. Think about that. And Frelimo's immediate warning was that no such thing as all right, let me just go back a little bit because I don't want us to miss that part. So while they were advancing, and on April 25th, 1974, Portuguese officers, tired of fighting 3 unwinnable wars in Africa. Remember that time they were fighting a war in Mozambique, they were fighting a war in Angola, and another one, I'm forgetting that other country. Okay, so anyway, so they were tired, and because of that, the government that was in Lisbon, that is the capital of Portugal, was overthrown at that time, while they were also being fought here in Mozambique. They were being fought by Frelimo. In Angola, they were also being fought by another independent movement, and in that other country. And at home also things were not okay. So the government that was in place at that time was overthrown, and the coup was almost bloodless. Nobody came onto the streets to defend the then Prime Minister Marcelo Caetona. Within 24 hours, the armed forces movement was in full control in Portugal. Okay, so Frelimo's immediate warning was that there was no such thing as a democratic colonialism, and I think that is something that Samora Machel really believed. You can't say there's a democratic colonialism. You can't argue like that. Colonialism is colonialism is colonialism is colonialism, period. So you can't say we are colonists and we're colonizing you, but we are also democratic. It doesn't work like that. And so that was the rallying call of Frelimo. So they said, even as much as, there is a new government in their colonial power in Portugal at that time, but they did not believe things would change, and that nobody should imagine that Mozambicans could tolerate Portuguese rule just because there had been a change of government in Lisbon. And Frelimo's fear were well-founded. The MFA, that is the Armed Forces Movement in Lisbon, that overthrew the government there, allowed General Antonio de Spinola to become the first post-coup president. He had been commander of the Portuguese forces in Guinea-Bissau. Yes, Guinea-Bissau, that is the country I was looking for. Guinea-Bissau, Angola, Mozambique. They were colonized by Portugal. All right, the Portuguese. And then it was called Portuguese Guinea, and was believed to be deeply implicated. So this guy was the one in charge, the president who was now in charge in Lisbon, after that government was overthrown and he became in charge. And he was the commander of the Portuguese forces in Guinea-Bissau, and the atrocities that had been committed under his watch. There's no way, the people of Mozambique or any other country, or Angola for that matter, could actually bank on a better relationship with this new regime in Portugal, owing to what that person was at the helm of the country at that time, what he had done in Guinea-Bissau at that time here in Africa. So they said, no, we really can't trust this new leadership in Portugal. And so he was deeply implicated in the assassination of the Guinean nationalist leader, Amilcar Cabral. And maybe this is another person, a very key African leader that one day will take time to learn and more about him. So he was implicated for the death of this person, and now he was the leader, the new prime minister there in Portugal. So Spinola had no intention of letting Mozambique and Angola go. So he dreamt of a Lusophone, a Commonwealth ran from Lisbon, like the way we have Commonwealth, the countries that thing makes my head spin even thinking about it, that were formerly colonized by the British, and then of course there are others who have joined who were never colonized by Britain, like I think Rwanda and Mozambique. I think, is it? Did Mozambique join? I think, but I'm not sure. But I know Rwanda did join, but they were never colonized by Britain. So I have a problem with that because of the psychology behind Commonwealth. We are former colonies, and that I struggle to understand why we even celebrate being part of such a union. But anyway, I digress. So this person, Spinola, the new leader in Portugal, had a similar dream. So he wanted to create a Lusophone of these countries that had been colonized by Portugal, and wanted a referendum on independence. And Samora Machel rejected such plans with the remark, and this is what he's quoted to have said: "You don't ask a slave if he wants to be free, particularly when he's already in revolt, and much less if you happen to be a slave owner." So, just going back to the words, there's no democracy in slavery. There's no democracy in colonialism. So you can't come here and tell us that you're democratic and you're giving us democracy while you're still colonizing us. So he said, no, you can't negotiate for such a thing, and we can't with the slave owner. It's not possible. So initial discussions between Frelimo and the new Portuguese government held in Lusaka in June 1974 proved fruitless. It was clear that Machel and the Portuguese Foreign Minister, Socialist Party leader Mario Soares, had no power to negotiate independence. So Machel sent one of his top advisors, Aquino de Braganca, who, as we will see, was one of the people who I think died from that fateful plane crash. Yes, to Lisbon to find out who really held power in Portugal. His answer was that Frelimo should really be talking to the MFA, particularly to military intellectuals such as Colonel Ernesto Melo Atunes, whose power was on the rise as that of Spinola waned away. So Samora Machel refused to give the Portuguese the ceasefire they wanted at that time for as long as there was no commitment to Mozambican independence. So he said, no, there's no democratic colonialization. That was his belief. So you can't have us stop fighting you, and you don't want to give us independence. We can't come in peace while you're insisting on oppressing our people, insisting on slavery, you're insisting on the marginalization, you're insisting on racism in our own country. You've taken off our lands, and yet you're telling us to put the arms down, but you will not agree to give us the independence. So we are not going to agree for a ceasefire until the independence of Mozambique is guaranteed, and the war would continue. That's what, Samora said. Frelimo reopened its front in Zambezia province and stepped up operations throughout the war zone, and there was little resistance following the collapse of Caetano government. Rank and file Portuguese soldiers saw little point in continuing to fight, preferring to stay in their barracks. More serious talks between Lisbon government and Frelimo ensued, and this time the MFA played a dominant role. The result was an agreement signed in Lusaka on September 7, 1974, which agreed to transfer full power to Frelimo with the date for independence set for June 25, 1975. And so a transitional government was set up containing ministers appointed by both Frelimo and Portugal, but headed by Frelimo's Joaquim Chissano, who later became the president after the death of Samora Machel. So at that time, Joaquim Chissano was the prime minister. Machel continued to rule Frelimo from Tanzania. At that time, remember, they had gone in Tanzania to organize. So Tanzania is also a very important country as far as its efforts under the then President Mwalimu Nyerere in liberation and the struggle for independence in Africa is concerned. It's very pivotal in a lot of these countries across Africa. And so at that time, Machel was there. Samora Machel was in Tanzania, and he ruled from there. He returned home triumphantly in a journey from the Ruvuma to the Maputo, the rivers marking the northern and southern boundaries of the country, in which he addressed rallies in every major population center in the country. And the journey was interrupted at the beach resort of Tofo in Hambane province for a meeting of the Frelimo Central Committee, which drew up Mozambique's first constitution. So that is where they had the first constitution just coming from Tanzania. This gave the outline of one-party socialist state, which Frelimo intended to establish. And remember, his ideology was built on Marxism and Leninism. And so Frelimo was constitutionally the leading force in Mozambican society, and the president of Frelimo would automatically be president of Mozambique. So on June 25th, 1975, Samora Machel proclaimed, and I'll quote him, "The total and complete independence of Mozambique and its constitution into the People's Republic of Mozambique," he said, "will be a state of people's democracy in which, under the leadership of the worker, a peasant, alliance, all patriot strata commit themselves to the destruction of the sequels of colonialism and to annihilate the system of exploitation of man by man. So he was really committed to get rid of the strongholds of colonialism in Mozambique. So let's just look at a bit of his governance style just after that very famous speech. Samora Machel's government moved quickly to bring key areas under state control. All land was nationalized. Individuals and institutions could not hold land. Okay, in the true spirit of communism, and but leased it from the state. And on July 24th, 1975, just a month after independence, all health and education institutions were nationalized. A National Health and Education Service was set up, and all private schools and clinics were abolished, because he really believed in equality and equity in the true spirit of those words. The Catholic Church immediately lost the privileged position because it was having a lot of these private schools and private hospitals. So it lost the privileged position it had held in these areas. And on February 3rd, 1976, the government nationalized all rented housing. Landlords, what do we want landlords for in our country? That's what he asked one time at the rally announcing the measure. Private ownership of houses was not banned. Anyone, Mozambican or foreign, could own a house of their own use, but building private property for rent was forbidden. Very extreme measures there. This changed the face of Mozambican cities. Black Mozambicans moved from the suburbs into blocks in the center of the cities, occupying houses and flats once owned by Portuguese landlords, and many of which had now been abandoned. So let's just look at a civil war that happened that now led to the end of Samora Machel. So in 1977, a rebel army known as Renamo launched a rebellion backed by Rhodesia, plunging the country into civil war following the collapse of Smith's government there in Rhodesia, that is Zimbabwe, formerly. Today it's known as Zimbabwe. So Ian Smith was there. So the rebel force began to receive backing from South Africa. The movement was initially known as RNM, translated in English as MNR, but as from 2003 adopted the acronym Renamo. Now, during the 1980s, the South African government took an increasingly hostile attitude to the frontline states, and Mozambique, in particularly, was accused of harboring military bases. And this is the time that South Africa was also heightened its agitation against apartheid in the late 80s, remember? And so the white ruling South Africa was very hostile towards what they considered frontline states, and Mozambique was one of them, and was accused of harboring military bases of the African National Congress. And on June 30th, 1981, South African commandos attacked 3 houses in the southern city of Matola, killing 12 ANC members as well as Portuguese electrician, while those killed were members of the ANC's armed wing, Umkhonto Wesizwe, meaning the spear of the nation. That wing of the ANC was called that. The houses were not a guerrilla base, as visiting diplomats and journalists soon confirmed. A fortnight later, Samora Machel threw down the gauntlet at a rally in Maputo's Independence Square. He embraced ANC leader Oliver Tambo and declared, "They want to come here and commit murder. So we say, let them come. Let all the racists come. Let the South Africans come. But let them be clear that the war will end in Pretoria." All right. And that is the judicial capital of South Africa, I believe. Now, helped by weapons airdropped by the South African Defence Forces, Renamo spread its operations across the entire country with the exception of the far north. And Frelimo reacted with a series of authoritarian measures, some of which deeply shocked its supporters inside and outside the country. The death penalty, already in force for serious security offences, was now extended to a range of economic crimes. And I think just even watching documentaries and the history of Samora Machel, if there's one thing that really agitated him, was corruption. was corruption. I think there's a documentary I was watching, and he was saying that when I'm far gone, you will see all these people you see here in Mozambique today, they will have cars, they will own houses. And if you ask them where they got them from, they will not be able to explain, because most likely they would have gotten it from dubious means and through corruption. How true were his words then? I think he was prophesying, and he was ready to sing, because after a lot of African countries got their independence and the struggle of independence was over, people forgot. People forgot that they had a country to build. And that's why when you hear the rallying call, "A luta continua," these were, Samora Machel's words. Yeah, "A luta continua." That means the struggle continues. We are liberated today. We are independent, but the struggle continues. The struggle to see our children get better education, the struggle to see that our countries become food secure, the struggle to see that we have proper institutions, and the struggle just to see a better society where everybody is equal and there's equality and there's equity. So the struggle continues. That's why he kept saying, "A luta continua." It is not enough that we have independence. We have to continue with the struggle to restore dignity to our people. And that is something that truly was at the core of everything that he believed and why he did what he did. Okay, and so, but the military was not doing very good at that time, and the economic situation drove Frelimo to give the apartheid government what it said it wanted, a non-aggression pact. And on March 16, 1984, on a railway carriage in the Nanman's land between South Africa and Mozambique. Remember, they were the frontline countries who were fighting the apartheid regime. On this other side, they had allowed some ANC and other fighters, or what they call comrades, to fight the white regime leaders in apartheid leaders from Mozambique. But after some problems that they were experiencing, the military and economic situation was not very good, so they were forced to sign an agreement of non-aggression pact, and that happened on the March 16th, 1984. And as on no man's land between South Africa and Mozambique, Samora Machel and South Africa's president at that time, P.W. Botha, signed the Nkomati Accord on non-aggression and good neighborliness. The deal expressed in the agreement was extremely simple, that South Africa would drop its support for Renamo. So South Africa was the one that was supporting this other group that had emerged in Mozambique that was fighting Frelimo. So the agreement was South Africa to stop supporting Renamo in exchange of Mozambique's dropping support for the ANC. Okay. So Samora Machel only partially honored commitment to expel various ANC members from his territory. So they agreed on this, but he did not fully honor this, because he really truly believed that until South Africa was liberated, until these other countries that were still struggling with these elements of colonialism were liberated, Africa was not truly liberated. So South Africa's support for Renamo did not stop as well. So they both violated this agreement. And massive shipments of arms were airlifted to Renamo immediately prior to the accord. And a senior South Africa official, Deputy Foreign Minister Louis Nel, even visited the Renamo base at Casa Banana in Gorongosa district, using an airstrip which South Africa had helped Renamo build. In mid-1985, the Mozambican and Zimbabwean armed forces launched a joint offensive to drive Renamo out of Gorongosa. Zimbabwean paratroopers ensured the capture of Casa Banana, but Renamo leader Alfonso Dhlakama fled north and re-established the Renamo headquarters in the district of Maringwe. Visiting Casa Banana on September 5th, Samora Machel was optimistic that he said, "We have broken the back of the snake, but the tail will still thrash around." He said, "We might have try to neutralize them, but parts of that they went and regrouped, and they're still causing some trouble there in the north." But in fact, the war continued, although its focus shifted northwards to Zambezia and Tete provinces, with Renamo operating with impunity out of Malawi. And Samora Machel, at that time, loathed the Malawian life president Hastings Kamuzu Banda. Okay, that is another African figure that we shall look at another time, who was the only leader of the independent African state who had established diplomatic relations with Pretoria. After an unsuccessful meeting with Banda, Machel openly threatened to place missiles on the Mozambican-Malawian border and to prevent trade from the landlocked Malawi passing through Mozambican territory. All right, so let's get to the end of this very long story. And on 19th October 1986, Samora Machel attended a summit in Mbala in Zambia called to put pressure on the Zairian dictator Mobutu Sese Seko over his support for the Angolan opposition movement UNITA. The strategy of the frontline states was to move against Mobutu and Banda in an attempt to end their support for UNITA and Renamo, and they regarded as South African surrogates. Although the Zambian authorities invited Machel to stay in Mbala overnight, he insisted on returning to Maputo. He had a meeting scheduled for the following morning, and which he intended to reshuffle the leadership of the armed forces. So you see, and Machel thus overrode the consequences. The plane, a president was not supposed to travel at night, especially those small planes at that time. So, but he overruled the security concerns that were opposed to him at that time, and he decided to travel anyway because he felt the meeting that he was supposed to have the next day to organize his armed forces was very important and he could not miss it. The plane never reached Maputo. That night, it crashed into a hillside at Bunzini, just inside South Africa, and Samora Machel and 33 others died. 9 people sitting at the back of the plane survived miraculously. The Mago Commission set up by the South African government, but which included high-level international representatives, investigated the incident and concluded that the accident was caused by pilot error, that is human error. Despite the acceptance of these findings by the International Civil Aviation Organization, the report was rejected by the Mozambican and the Soviet governments in Russia. And may I add that the pilot of that plane was Russian? The latter submitted a minority report suggesting that the aircraft was intentionally lured off course by a decoy radio navigation beacon set up specifically for this purpose by the South Africans, and speculation about the accident has therefore continued to the present day, particularly in Mozambique. And when I think there's a documentary about that, and there's a guy who came out and several others who have confirmed, who have confessed, and others have corroborated their stories, and they're saying yes, indeed, that accident was by design. So I don't know why nobody has bothered to look into that. And of course, he was succeeded by Joachim Chissano, who became the president after his death. So that is the very long and short of Samora Machel. He died about 36 years ago at the age of 53 years old, and he was the first black president of Mozambique from the country's independence in 1975. And we've seen the struggles that he went through, and of course with other African leaders at that time, to liberate fully countries across Africa. Thank you so much for watching this afternoon. We are remembering Samora Machel, who, as I said, died 36 years ago there from a plane crash in South Africa on his way from Zambia. My name is Miriam Ogutu. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.